You wake up at 3 a.m. with your mind racing through everything that could go wrong tomorrow. The presentation, the conversation, the decision you have to make. Your heart pounds and you can't turn it off. Epictetus, a philosopher who lived 2,000 years ago, understood this kind of suffering intimately. Epictetus was born around 50 AD in Hierapolis, a Roman territory in what is now Turkey. He entered the world as a slave, not metaphorically, literally owned by another human being. His name itself wasn't even really his name. Epictetus simply means acquired one in Greek. He was brought to Rome as property of Epaphroditus, a wealthy freedman who served in Nero's court. Legend says his master once twisted his leg so badly it left him permanently lame. Whether that story is true or not, we know Epictetus lived with chronic pain and the daily humiliation of having no control over his own life. Eventually he was freed, but by then something profound had happened. Living for decades with absolute powerlessness over his external circumstances, Epictetus had discovered something radical. He still possessed complete power over his internal response. This insight became the foundation of his teaching, which he shared in a school he founded after being exiled from Rome. The core of Epictetus's philosophy is called the dichotomy of control. In Greek, he called it the distinction between ephemen, what is up to us, and ephemen, what is not up to us. This isn't just a mental trick, it's a fundamental reorganization of how you perceive reality. Here's how Epictetus framed it in the very opening of his Enchiridion. Some things are within our power while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, and in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. What makes this psychologically profound is that most anxiety comes from applying effort to the wrong category. You're trying to control your boss's opinion, the outcome of a job interview, whether someone texts you back, what happens in the economy. These attempts aren't just futile, they actively generate suffering because you're repeatedly confronting your own powerlessness. Epictetus argues that the only things truly within your control are your judgments, your intentions, your desires, and your aversions, essentially, your inner responses. Everything else, including your own body, your reputation, and all external outcomes, are ultimately not up to you. Accepting this isn't resignation, it's the beginning of actual power. The first technique derived from this principle is what I call the control audit. When anxiety hits and your mind is racing, you're going to externalize the spiral by writing down exactly what you're worried about. Not journaling about feelings, cataloging specific fears. Get them out of your head and onto paper or a screen. Once you have your list, you're going to draw two columns. Label one within my control and the other outside my control. Now go through each item and assign it honestly. This is harder than it sounds because your mind will resist. You'll want to say giving a good presentation is within your control. But is it really? You control your preparation and your effort. You don't control whether the projector works, whether your boss is in a bad mood, or whether someone asks a question you can't answer. Be ruthlessly precise. Getting the promotion goes in the outside column. Doing excellent work and clearly expressing my interest in the role goes in the within column. Making my parents proud is outside. Acting according to my own values is within. The goal isn't to feel better immediately, it's to see reality clearly. Here's a specific example. Sarah wakes up anxious about a client presentation in 6 hours. She does the control audit. Client saying yes to our proposal, outside. Knowing my material inside and out, within. Technical difficulties during the presentation, outside. Having backup plans prepared, within. Client's budget constraints we don't know about, outside. Clearly communicating the value we offer, within. After this audit, Sarah's anxiety doesn't vanish, but it changes shape. She stops mentally rehearsing the client's objections she can't predict. Instead, she reviews her materials one more time and prepares 3 different ways to explain the core value proposition. She's redirected her mental energy from the outside column to the within column. That's the technique working. The second technique is what Epictetus called negative visualization, but I'll call it the Premeditatio framework, using the Latin term the later Stoics preferred. This is specifically for anticipatory anxiety, when you're worried about something that hasn't happened yet. Most advice tells you to think positive. Epictetus says do the opposite. Deliberately imagine the worst-case scenario in detail. But here's the key distinction. You're not catastrophizing, which is imagining disaster and then spiraling into helplessness. You're practicing the Stoic discipline of deliberately facing what you fear, then asking, if this actually happened, what would I still control? How would I respond with virtue? You're rehearsing resilience while you still have psychological resources. The structure is 3 steps. First, articulate the fear specifically. Not things going badly, but I get fired. Second, walk through what you would actually do in that scenario, focusing only on your response, not the catastrophe itself. Third, notice what remains within your control even in the worst case. This is the move that transforms the exercise from pessimism into empowerment. Here's how it works in practice. Marcus, a software developer, is terrified of being laid off during company restructuring. Instead of suppressing this fear, he does the Premeditatio. He writes, I get laid off on Friday. Then he maps his response. I update my resume that weekend. I reach out to my network on Monday. I file for unemployment benefits. I reduce unnecessary expenses immediately. I apply to 10 jobs per week while taking on freelance projects. He's not planning to get fired. He's proving to himself he could handle it. What shifts is the quality of his anxiety. Before, it was vague dread with no outlet. After the Premeditatio, it becomes, this would be difficult, but I know exactly what I'd do, and I'd still be me, someone capable of thoughtful action. The worst case stops being unthinkable. That's when it loses its power over you. The third technique addresses the moment when anxiety spikes acutely, when your thoughts start cascading and your body follows. This is the Reframing Protocol, derived from Epictetus's insistence that it's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about events. The Greek term is hypolepsis, the opinion or interpretation you form. When anxious thoughts hit, your brain is generating a specific story. This means I'm failing. This proves I'm not good enough. This will end badly. The Reframing Protocol is a structured intervention. First, you catch the thought. Second, you name it as an interpretation, not a fact. You literally say internally or aloud, I'm telling myself the story that. This creates distance. Third, you ask the Stoic question, is this judgment within my control? The event isn't, the outcome isn't, but the story I'm telling about what this means, that's entirely within my control. Fourth, you generate an alternative interpretation that focuses on what you can do right now. Not toxic positivity, not pretending everything is fine, just a story that directs you toward action within your control. Here's this in real time. Jessica's boss sends a terse email. We need to talk tomorrow morning. Immediate anxiety spike. Her mind generates the story. I'm getting fired. I knew my last project wasn't good enough. She catches it and applies the protocol. I'm telling myself the story that this email means I'm getting fired, but that's my interpretation of 4 words. I don't actually know what she wants to discuss. She asks, is my interpretation within my control? Yes. The actual content of tomorrow's conversation? No. She generates an alternative. This might be about the project or budget planning or a dozen other things. What I control right now is reviewing my recent work so I can speak clearly about it tomorrow and getting decent sleep tonight so I'm mentally sharp. The anxiety doesn't disappear, but she's transformed it from paralysis into preparation. The most common pitfall with Epictetus's dichotomy of control is mistaking it for passivity. People hear most things are outside your control and think it means don't try, don't care, accept whatever happens. That's completely backward. Epictetus is telling you to try harder than you ever have before, but only on what actually responds to your effort. The confusion comes from conflating acceptance with indifference. You accept that external outcomes aren't guaranteed no matter how well you perform. But that acceptance frees you to give everything you have to the performance itself. The archer accepts she doesn't control where the arrow lands after release, but that makes her focus on her stance, her breathing, and her release even more total. She's not less engaged. She's more engaged with what matters. Another pitfall is using the dichotomy as a way to avoid grief or disappointment. I shouldn't be sad my relationship ended because other people's choices are outside my control. Epictetus never said, don't feel. He said, don't add unnecessary suffering to unavoidable pain by insisting reality should be different than it is. You can grieve what's lost and still recognize that wishing it hadn't happened is where the torment multiplies. The final pitfall is treating the dichotomy as a one-time insight rather than a daily practice. You don't learn this once and move on. You forget it constantly. Every day your mind will try to control things outside your power. Every day you practice redirecting. That's not failure. That's the practice. Epictetus ran a school because this wisdom requires repeated exposure, not a lightning bolt of understanding. Think about what Epictetus's life actually was. Decades as a slave, his body damaged, his freedom entirely at someone else's whim, and yet he's remembered 2,000 years later not as a victim, but as a teacher of human freedom. That's because he discovered something most of us still haven't. You're already free where it counts. You've always been free. The prison is the one you build by fighting what you can't change. Your anxiety right now, whatever its specific content, is partly the weight of trying to control too much. The job market, other people's judgments, the future of your industry, the timeline of your success. You carry all of this as if it's your job to manage reality itself. It's not. It never was. What's yours is your effort, your integrity, and your response. That's not a small domain. It's the only domain that actually exists. When you do the control audit, you're not learning new information. You're seeing what you already knew, but keep forgetting that most of what you worry about is not your job. When you practice Premeditatio, you're not being morbid. You're building the psychological muscle that lets you face uncertainty without collapsing. When you reframe your interpretations, you're exercising the one freedom no one can take from you, the freedom to choose what things mean. Epictetus wrote, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." That sentence contains the entire solution to modern anxiety. Not suppress it, not eliminate uncertainty, just persistently, imperfectly, return your attention to the territory where your effort actually matters. That's the practice. That's what we're doing here. If this gave you something to work with, I'll be here next time with more ancient wisdom for modern problems. Until then, practice the dichotomy. You'll forget it. That's fine. Practice it again.